street kid stumbled upon a girl clinging to life in a grimy alley, a pendant with an engraved number clutched in her hand. Acting on instinct, he dialed the number. Little did he know, the voice on the other end belonged to Alaric, a vampire king, and the girl he was trying to save was his only daughter, Maya. The city never truly slept, but it had its quiet pockets, and 3mm was one of them. Kelvin, a seasoned survivor of the streets, tightened his threadbare hoodie against the sharp autumn air. His worn sneakers whispered against the cracked pavement as he navigated the desolate industrial district. His backpack chimed softly with the weight of 12 empty bottles, a meager haul for the night. If he could beat the rush at the recycling center, it might be enough for a stale donut and a lukewarm coffee breakfast. The alley behind the defunct textile factory was his usual shortcut. He knew every overflowing dumpster, every rusted fire escape ladder, every dark corner where he could melt into the shadows if trouble came calling. 2 years on the unforgiving streets had taught him to be invisible, to snatch what he needed, and never, ever ask questions. He was halfway through the alley when he saw her. A girl, no older than 8, lay slumped against the cold brick wall, resembling a discarded porcelain doll. Her platinum blonde hair cascaded across the grimy pavement, catching the distant, flickering street light and transforming into spun silver. Kelvin froze, every survival instinct screaming at him to keep walking, to look away. Street rule number 1, mind your own business. Those who interfered with other people's messes invariably ended up hurt or worse. But she was just a kid and smaller than him. A pang of something he hadn't felt in a long time, compassion. Maybe, tugged at him. Hey! He croaked, his voice rougher than he intended, echoing off the grimy brick walls. Silence. No response. He approached cautiously, his eyes darting into the inky shadows, searching for any sign of danger. A drug deal gone sour? A brutal gang initiation? The unspeakable horrors of human trafficking? He had seen it all play out in these very alleys. But the girl was alone, utterly alone. As he drew closer, his breath hitched. Her clothes were wrong. A crimson dress that looked like it belonged behind glass in a museum. Luxurious velvet and shimmering silk, adorned with intricate black embroidery that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. Antique lace graced the collar and cuffs. The fabric whispered of a wealth he couldn't even fathom. The kind of obscene expense that never, ever found its way into this forgotten corner of the city unless something had gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. Kelvin dropped to his knees beside her, his backpack forgotten, its precious cargo of bottles clinking uselessly against the pavement. Can you hear me? He pressed 2 fingers against her throat, mimicking a gesture he'd seen in countless movies, searching for a pulse, a sign of life. Nothing. He tried her wrist, his own fingers clumsy and trembling. Still nothing. But her skin was unnaturally cold. Not the clammy coldness of death, but the chilling cold of a refrigerator, as if she'd been lying in a freezer. And her complexion was pale beyond pale. Not the pallor of sickness or fear, but a translucent, almost ethereal white, as if he could see the delicate blue veins pulsing beneath her skin in the darkness. Come on, he muttered, tilting her head back to check for any sign of breath. That's when he noticed her hand. Tiny, delicate fingers were wrapped tightly around something at her throat. He gently, cautiously, uncurled them. Pendant. A massive, teardrop-shaped ruby, the color of fresh blood, surrounded by a cage of intricately crafted black thorns worked in what looked like solid, gleaming gold. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, almost medieval, like something a princess would wear in a fairy tale. He turned it over, and his heart stopped. Numbers were engraved on the back in elegant, swirling silver script. A phone number. Kelvin stared at the unconscious girl, then at the pendant, then back at the girl. This was all wrong. Wrong dress, wrong jewelry, wrong everything. He should run. He should put as much distance as possible between himself and this situation before whoever owned that pendant came looking. But she wasn't breathing, or at least he couldn't tell if she was. His phone, a battered flip phone he'd bought for $10 at a pawn shop, was already in his hand. Before he could talk himself out of it, before the fear could paralyze him completely, he dialed. 1 ring, 2 rings. Who dares use this line? The voice that answered wasn't a greeting. It was a command. Deep, resonant, vibrating with an accent that sounded ancient, vaguely European. The kind of voice that made you stand up straighter, even through the tinny speaker of a cheap cell phone. It made the hairs on the back of Kelvin's neck stand on end. Kelvin's voice cracked with nerves. He cleared his throat, trying to sound older, more confident. I found a girl. She's unconscious in an alley on Warehouse Row, near the old textile factory. She's not breathing. I think she's really cold. And she's wearing this pendant with your number on it. Describe her. The voice cut through his stammering words like a honed blade, sharp and absolute. Maybe 8 years old, really pale, blonde hair, wearing this fancy red dress. Like really fancy, museum fancy. What color are her eyes? I don't know. They're closed. She's unconscious. Open them. The command in that voice left no room for argument. It wasn't a request. It was an order from someone who was unaccustomed to being disobeyed. Someone who had never been denied anything in his life. Kelvin's hands shook as he gently lifted one of the girl's eyelids. He gasped. Her iris was crystal blue, but within it, tiny flecks of crimson seemed to pulse like embers in dying coals, like drops of blood suspended in ice. Blue, he whispered, his voice trembling. But with red things, moving red things. The silence on the other end stretched for so long that Kelvin thought the call had dropped. That he was alone in the alley with the unconscious girl and the ominous pendant. Your name. It wasn't a question. Kelvin. Look, this kid needs a hospital. Stay exactly where you are. Do not let anyone approach her. Do not touch the pendant again. Do not call anyone else. We are coming. Wait, who? The line went dead. Kelvin stared at his phone, his mind racing. A chaotic jumble of questions and fears. We. Who is we? Should he call 911 anyway? But something in that voice, despite its icy authority, had sounded utterly certain, desperate even. Desperation wrapped in steel and authority. He looked down at the girl. She seemed even paler now, if that was possible. Her lips had taken on a faint blue tinge. On impulse, he shrugged off his hoodie, the only protection he had against the night's chill, and laid it gently over her small frame, then sat back against the wall beside her, keeping watch. His fingers instinctively sought the familiar comfort of the small folding knife in his pocket. A scavenged blade, not much, but it was something. Minutes ticked by, maybe 5, maybe 10. Time seemed to warp and distort in the cold, silent alley. Then he heard them. No sirens, no screeching tires, just the almost silent purr of expensive engines. 3 black cars glided into the alley, sleek, predatory things with tinted windows that reflected nothing, swallowing the meager light. They shouldn't have fit. The alley was barely wide enough for a delivery truck, but they moved with impossible precision, stopping in perfect formation, just feet from where he crouched. The doors opened in perfect synchronization, like a scene from a high-budget action movie. The figures that emerged wore long black coats that gleamed like oil in the dim light. 7 of them, moving with a fluid, unnatural grace that made Kelvin's survival instinct scream. Predator. They wore no uniforms, no identifying insignia, but something about the way they moved, coordinated, efficient, dangerous, screamed military or something far worse. The tallest one approached first, even hunched in his coat. He had to be over 6.5 feet tall. In the shadows of his hood, Kelvin caught fleeting glimpses of sharp, angular features and eyes that reflected the street light wrong, in a way that made his skin crawl. Too bright, too red. You called King Alaric? The man said, his voice respectful but weary as he knelt beside the girl. His hands moved over her with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, examining the pendant, assessing the scene. Step back, boy. Is she going to be okay? Kelvin didn't move, his voice a defiant croak. What's wrong with her? The man's head snapped toward him, and for just a second, Kelvin saw his eyes clearly in the harsh light from the cars. They were crimson, actual glowing crimson, like backlit rubies. You found Princess Maya alive. That is all that matters. He gestured, and 2 others moved forward with what looked like a medical stretcher. All padding and restraints and unfamiliar equipment that Kelvin didn't recognize. But you contacted the king directly. He will want to speak with you. Princess? The word came out as a strangled squeak. Kelvin hated how young and vulnerable he sounded. Princess of what? The man stood, and Kelvin suddenly realized just how impossibly tall he was, how fundamentally wrong he was. Too graceful, too perfect, too still, like he didn't need to breathe. That is not my question to answer. His crimson eyes studied Kelvin with an unnerving intensity that made him want to run, to disappear. You touched the royal pendant and live, the figure said, tilting his head slightly. Interesting. Kelvin's mouth went dry. He didn't understand what that meant, but he understood the weight of those words, the way everyone went still, the way all eyes turned to him. Kelvin, the man, King Alaric, the others had called him, studied him with unnerving intensity. You have done House Dracula a great service tonight. That debt will be repaid. They lifted Maya with reverent care, her small body cradled like spun glass. As they moved toward the cars, King Alaric paused, his gaze lingering on Kelvin. You will come with us. It wasn't a question. Kelvin's life on the streets had just ended. He wasn't sure if what came next would be better, or infinitely worse. The car smelled like expensive leather and something else, something metallic and sweet that made Kelvin's stomach churn. He sat pressed against the door, as far from the pale figures as possible, while Maya lay across the back seat between them, still unconscious. They had tried to separate them at the alley. Kelvin had refused. He didn't know why, didn't know what insanity had made him refuse when creatures with glowing red eyes told him to step back. But when they'd moved to take Maya without him, something in his chest had twisted hard, and the word had burst out before he could stop it. No. King Alaric had stared at him for a long moment, his crimson eyes piercing. Then he smiled, a terrible expression that showed too many teeth. Bring him. Now they were descending. The cars had driven into the basement of the oldest church in the city, a Gothic monstrosity that had been condemned for years. But instead of stopping, they kept going down a ramp that shouldn't exist, through passages carved from living rock, spiraling deeper and deeper until Kelvin's ears popped and the air grew cold as a tomb. The passage opened into a cavern that stole his breath. A palace of black marble stretched before him, impossibly vast, impossibly beautiful. Crimson light emanated from veins in the stone itself, pulsing like a heartbeat. Columns soared toward a ceiling lost in shadow, carved with scenes of battles and feasts and things Kelvin didn't have names for. Chandeliers dripped with what looked like frozen blood, casting everything in shades of red and darkness. And there were hundreds of them. Vampires. The word crashed into his mind with absolute certainty. They lined the halls, emerged from doorways, watched from balconies above. All beautiful, all deadly, all staring at him with eyes that gleamed like predators spotting wounded prey. A human, someone hissed. In the obsidian palace. Another whispered, the words dripping with shock and hunger. The king has lost his mind. Kelvin wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at him to bolt back up those passages, back to the familiar dangers of the streets. But hands gripped his shoulders, gentle but unmovable, guiding him forward. They carried Maya ahead of him through halls that seemed to stretch forever, finally entering a throne room that made the rest look plain. The throne itself was carved from a single piece of black stone veined with red, and the man who rose from it made every vampire Kelvin had seen look ordinary. King Alaric Valturi wore a perfectly tailored black suit with crimson accents that probably cost more than Kelvin would see in 10 lifetimes. His snow-white hair fell past his shoulders, contrasting sharply with skin pale as moonlight. But it was his eyes, crimson as fresh blood, ancient as mountains, that made Kelvin's knees weak. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace, making the air itself feel heavy. Lay my daughter here, Alaric commanded, gesturing to a chaise lounge of black velvet. They placed Maya down with infinite care. A woman in flowing robes, some kind of healer, Kelvin guessed, immediately began examining her, her hands glowing with soft crimson light. She will recover, my king, the healer said after a moment. But she was drained nearly to death. Another hour and... Who? Alaric's voice could have cut steel. Unknown. The wounds were inflicted by vampire fangs, but I sensed no familiar signature. A growl rippled through the assembled vampires, low and dangerous. And you? Alaric turned those terrible eyes on Kelvin. You found her in an alley. Yes, sir. How very convenient. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Kelvin's heart hammered against his ribs. I didn't hurt her. I just found her and called the number and... Papa! The word froze everyone. Maya stirred, her eyes fluttering open, the same crimson as her father's, but somehow softer, younger. She looked around the throne room with confusion, then fear. Then her gaze landed on Kelvin, and something in her expression eased. Safe, she whispered, reaching toward him. Kelvin moved before anyone could stop him, crossing to kneel beside the chaise. Maya's small hand grabbed his, gripping tight. You're safe, she repeated, tears sliding down her pale cheeks. You smell safe, princess. Alaric's voice had changed, gone softer with concern. Come to Papa, let the human go. Maya's grip tightened, her other hand clutching Kelvin's arm. He found me, he kept me warm, he called you, he's safe, Papa. Everything else is scary. The king stared at his daughter, then at Kelvin with an expression Kelvin couldn't read. Shock, maybe, or suspicion. My daughter does not trust easily, Alaric said slowly. She has been taught to fear humans, to see them as prey or enemies. Yet she clings to a street child as if he were her salvation. He moved closer, and Kelvin fought every urge to flinch away. You are either a witness to an attack on royal blood, Alaric continued, his voice dropping to something deadly, or you are somehow complicit in it. Until I determine which, you will remain here under guard. If you harmed her, boy, death will be a mercy I do not grant. Guards materialized from the shadows, their hands settling on Kelvin's shoulders. Wait, I didn't. But Maya was already being pulled away by healers, her small voice crying, safe, 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 as she reached back toward him. And Kelvin was being dragged in the opposite direction, into a palace of monsters, with no idea if he'd ever see daylight again. They released him at dawn, though released was generous. The guards had hauled him back through those endless tunnels, up into the church basement, and shoved him toward the street as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky pink and gold. Stay where we can find you, the taller one said, his crimson eyes already fading to something almost human in the growing light. The king isn't finished with you. Then they were gone, dissolving into the shadows of the church as if they'd never existed. Kelvin stood on the cracked sidewalk, exhausted and shaking, his mind still struggling to accept what he'd seen. Vampires, an underground palace, a princess who'd clung to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. He touched his arm where Maya had gripped him, half expecting to find it had all been some fever dream, but his hoodie still smelled faintly of that sweet, metallic scent from the car. And when he looked down, he could see a smudge of something dark on his sleeve. Blood, maybe? He didn't want to think about it. The walk back to his hideout took 40 minutes. He'd been squatting in an abandoned apartment building on the east side for 3 months now. The landlord had died, the city was still fighting over the property, and nobody bothered checking the upper floors. Kelvin had claimed a corner unit on the 4th floor, the one with a window that still had most of its glass and a door that locked from the inside. But as he approached, everything felt wrong. The morning was too quiet. The usual sounds, Mrs. Chin opening her convenience store, the bus hissing to a stop, teenagers shouting on their way to school. All seemed muted, distant, and there was a woman across the street. She stood in the shadow of a boarded-up laundromat, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to drink the light. Not a vampire. Kelvin had learned to recognize that predatory grace, that unnatural stillness. This woman moved like a human but a dangerous one, like the soldiers he'd seen sometimes in the downtown square. Her eyes locked onto his, and even from across the street, Kelvin felt the weight of her gaze, a cold, calculating assessment that made his blood run cold. Then she turned and walked away, her hand lifting in what might have been a wave or a warning. Kelvin's skin crawled. He hurried inside, taking the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding. When he reached his floor, he froze. A crimson vial sat on his doorstep, no bigger than his thumb, filled with liquid that seemed to glow faintly in the dim hallway. A note was wrapped around it, held in place with a rubber band. His hands shook as he unfolded the paper. Your mother died for this. They're coming for you next. The handwriting punched him in the gut. He'd seen it before, on the 3 letters his mother had left him before she died 4 years ago. Letters he'd read so many times the creases had nearly torn through. This was her handwriting. He'd know it anywhere, but that was impossible. She was dead. He'd watched them lower her into the ground. Kelvin grabbed the vial and the note, fumbling with his key, desperate to get inside, to think, to figure out what was happening. The door swung open, and vampires materialized in his room. He yelped, stumbling backward, but they moved faster, blocking the hallway. 3 of them, including one of the guards from last night. The boy reeks of hunter magic, one said, his nose wrinkling in disgust. They've marked him. Another confirmed, holding up the crimson vial. The crimson serum. How did they know to find him here? It doesn't matter. The guard from last night growled. Get him out now. Wait, marked? What marked? I didn't do anything. I just found. Glass shattered. The window in his room exploded inward, and figures in black tactical gear poured through like smoke. Crossbows, silver knives, weapons that gleamed with something that made the vampires hiss and recoil. Hunters. Everything became chaos. The vampires moved with impossible speed, engaging the hunters in a whirlwind of violence that demolished what little furniture Kelvin owned. A crossbow bolt whistled past his ear and buried itself in the wall, the tip glowing with strange symbols. One hunter lunged for Kelvin, shouting something about the marked one. But a vampire intercepted, and they crashed through the door frame in a tangle of limbs and violence. Go! The guard yelled at Kelvin, shoving him toward the stairs. Down now! Kelvin ran, his legs pumping, adrenaline coursing through him. The sounds of fighting intensified, screams, crashes, the wet sound of blades finding flesh. He took the stairs 3 at a time, terror giving him speed he didn't know he had. More hunters appeared on the 2nd floor landing, cutting off his escape. He changed direction, bursting through a door into someone's old apartment, racing through rooms that still had faded wallpaper and broken furniture, finding a fire escape on the far side. He was halfway down the rusted ladder when a vampire appeared below him, moving so fast Kelvin didn't see him arrive. He was just suddenly there, looking up with those crimson eyes. Jump. What? Jump, boy. I'll catch you. Kelvin jumped. Strong arms caught him, breaking his fall, and then the world blurred. They were moving impossibly fast, the city streaking past in a rush of color and sound. More vampires joined them, forming a protective circle as they ran. Kelvin caught glimpses of pursuit hunters on motorcycles, a black van, figures on rooftops. But the vampires were faster, impossibly faster. They ran until the city fell away and mountains rose ahead, until a castle emerged from the mist, like something out of a storybook, all dark towers and ancient stone. "Welcome," the guard said as they stopped at massive iron gates, "to Castle Dracula. The princess has been asking for you." The gates swung open, and Kelvin realized his life on the streets hadn't just ended in that alley. It had ended the moment he decided not to walk away. Castle Dracula rose from the mountainside like a crown of thorns, all impossible spires and Gothic arches that seemed to defy gravity itself. Perpetual twilight clung to it, not quite day, not quite night, as if the castle existed in its own pocket of time. Gargoyles perched on every corner, their stone eyes following Kelvin as the guards hurried him through courtyards and across bridges that spanned dizzying drops into mist-filled canyons. He thought the Obsidian Palace was impressive. This place made that look like a waiting room. They didn't give him time to clean up or rest. The guards marched him straight through massive doors of black wood reinforced with silver, down a corridor lined with portraits of pale figures in ancient clothing, their painted eyes tracking his movement. Whispers followed him, servants and nobles alike stopping to stare at the filthy human child being escorted through their sanctum. The council chamber doors opened with a groan that sounded almost alive. The room beyond was circular, ringed with high-backed chairs of carved stone. Vampires occupied most of them. Dozens of pale, beautiful, deadly faces turned toward him as he was led to the center. A symbol was inlaid in the black marble floor beneath his feet, a rose wrapped in thorns, done in crimson and silver. He stood in the heart of it, feeling like a sacrifice on an altar. King Alaric sat in the largest chair, elevated slightly above the others. Maya was beside him, looking tiny in her own throne, still wearing a nightgown and wrapped in a blanket of black silk. When she saw Kelvin, her face lit up, and she started to rise, but her father's hand on her shoulder kept her seated. "The court is assembled," Alaric announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. "We are here to determine the fate of the human child who bears the name Kelvin." A woman rose from one of the chairs, elegant in a way that made Kelvin think of ice sculptures and knife edges. Her hair was black as midnight, swept up in an elaborate style that probably took hours. Her gown was silver, and her eyes were like frozen lakes, beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. "Councilwoman Seraphine," Alaric acknowledged. "Your Majesty." She inclined her head just enough to be respectful, not enough to be deferential. "I will speak plainly. This situation reeks of manipulation." Her gaze locked onto Kelvin, and he fought the urge to step back. "A human boy living on the streets just happens to find our princess in an alley," Seraphine continued, her voice silk wrapped around steel. "He just happens to have the courage or foolishness to touch a royal pendant that should have burned him to ash. He just happens to call the emergency line, which only 3 humans in the entire city even know exists. And Princess Maya, who has trusted no one outside her immediate family since the incident 3 years ago, just happens to bond with him instantly." She turned to address the full council. "Too many coincidences. This boy is either a spy planted by the hunters, or he's something far worse. A weapon they don't even know they've created." Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Kelvin's mouth went dry. "I didn't do anything," he said, his voice smaller than he wanted. "I just found her and—" "Silence," Seraphine snapped. "Humans speak when given permission." "He has my permission." Alaric's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Continue, boy." Kelvin swallowed hard, trying to moisten his parched throat. "I just found her. I didn't know who she was. I didn't." Kelvin knew nothing of this. I couldn't abandon her there," he stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "How very touching," Seraphine said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. It was clear she found nothing endearing about his actions. "And yet," she continued, her gaze sharp and piercing, "the hunters knew precisely where to find you this morning. Hunters who conveniently left you a vial of crimson serum. A substance that takes weeks to painstakingly craft. A substance more valuable than this very castle we stand in. Why waste such a precious resource on a mere street urchin unless you're far more valuable to their twisted plans than you let on?" "I don't know," Kelvin cried out, his voice cracking with fear and confusion. "I don't know anything about hunters or serum, I swear." "Papa, please stop." Maya's voice rang through the chamber, high and desperate. She abandoned her throne, her small hands clenched into defiant fists. "He's scared, terribly scared. He doesn't understand any of this. I can feel it, Papa. I can feel his fear." "You can feel it, can you?" Another council member leaned forward, his voice skeptical. He was an older vampire, his steel-gray hair a testament to his long years. "Princess, explain yourself." Maya looked to her father, her eyes pleading for understanding. Alaric nodded, granting her permission. "This morning," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I woke up and I felt him, the safe one. He was terrified, so incredibly scared, and there were bad people trying to hurt him." Her voice trembled slightly. "I told Papa we had to help him, and Papa, being the kind ruler he is, sent the guards." She turned her ancient crimson eyes, so out of place in her childlike face, to Kelvin. "He didn't know we were coming, Papa. He was just running. He's not a spy, I promise you. He's just scared and alone." The council chamber erupted in a flurry of whispers. Seraphine's eyes narrowed, her expression unreadable. "The princess sensed him. From here?" someone asked, their voice laced with disbelief. "That's nearly 20 miles. She's never demonstrated such range before." Another voice chimed in, adding fuel to the fire. "Which proves my point," Seraphine declared, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "There is something deeply unnatural about this connection. This boy is a weapon whether he knows it or not. A tool in someone else's game. Or," Alaric said, rising from his throne, the word silencing the entire chamber. Every eye turned to him. "He is something else entirely, something we do not yet understand." He descended from the dais, each step measured and deliberate, until he stood before Kelvin, his presence radiating power. Up close, his aura was suffocating. "Who is your mother, boy?" he demanded, his gaze unwavering. "Sarah," Kelvin replied, his voice barely audible. "Sarah Chin. And your father?" "Never knew him," Kelvin mumbled. "Mom said he left before I was born." Did your mother have unusual abilities? Alaric pressed, his eyes searching Kelvin's face. Did she speak of strange things? Did she keep secrets? Kelvin's mind raced. He thought of the letters, the mysterious handwriting on today's note, his mother's cryptic warnings. She said weird things sometimes, he admitted hesitantly. About staying hidden, about being careful who I trusted. I always just thought she was paranoid. She was protecting you, Alaric said softly, his voice filled with a hint of understanding. Then, raising his voice, addressing the entire council, he declared, I decree that Kelvin will remain under royal protection as a companion to Princess Maya. He will reside in the castle under guard until we determine the truth of his nature and his mother's legacy. The chamber exploded with outrage. A human in the castle is forbidden. Someone shouted. It violates every law. Your Majesty, this is madness. Another voice cried out, but Alaric's eyes flashed crimson, and his power rolled out like a wave, pressing everyone back into their chairs. I am your king, he said, his voice deadly quiet, silencing all dissent. And I have spoken. Court is dismissed. The tower room was absurd. That was Kelvin's first thought as servants. Actual servants in black and silver uniforms ushered him inside and closed the door behind him with a soft click. A four-poster bed dominated the space, draped in dark velvet that probably cost more than everything Kelvin had owned in his entire life combined. Real wood furniture gleamed in the soft light. A fireplace crackled with actual burning logs, and windows looked out over mountains painted silver by the moonlight. He stood in the center of the room, still in his dirty street clothes, afraid to touch anything, as if the mere act of contact would shatter the illusion. For 2 years, he'd slept on cardboard, considered himself lucky when he found a corner that blocked the wind. Now he had a bed that could fit 4 people and pillows that looked like clouds. He wanted to cry or laugh, maybe both, a chaotic mix of relief and disbelief threatening to overwhelm him. Instead, he kicked off his worn sneakers and approached the bed like it might bite him. The mattress gave slightly under his weight, soft but supportive. Nothing like the lumpy disaster in his old apartment. Clean sheets, an actual blanket. He lay back and stared at the canopy above him, intricately carved with roses and thorns, and wondered if he'd wake up back in the alley. If this whole insane experience was nothing but a fever dream. You're not asleep yet. Kelvin bolted upright so fast his vision spun. Maya stood beside the bed, her small figure wrapped in a robe of deep crimson, her platinum hair braided for sleep. She smiled at his startled reaction. How did you? The door's locked and there are guards. Secret passages, she said matter-of-factly, as if every castle had them. This used to be my aunt's room, 300 years ago. She liked to sneak out too. She climbed onto the bed without asking, settling cross-legged on top of the covers. Up close, Kelvin could see she looked better than she had in the alley, color in her cheeks, strength in her movements. But her eyes held a weight no 8-year-old should carry. I need to tell you something, Kelvin, Maya said, her voice serious. Something I didn't say in court because Papa gets scary when he's really angry, and this would make him really angry. Kelvin's stomach tightened. Maya, if this is going to get you in trouble. I was lured out, she blurted, the words coming fast, like she'd been holding them in for too long. 3 nights ago, I found a note in my room. I don't know how it got past the wards, but it said there was information about the boy from the prophecy waiting for me at the old cathedral downtown. What prophecy? Kelvin asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. I don't know exactly, but I've heard Papa and the council whisper about it sometimes. Something about a child who bridges 2 worlds. I thought I wanted to know. Her voice got smaller, laced with regret. So I snuck out. I went to the cathedral and someone was waiting. She pulled her knees up to her chest, suddenly looking exactly like the frightened child she was. They gave me tea, she continued, her voice trembling. They said it would help me see visions of the prophecy, but it was crimson serum mixed with something else. Something that made me so sick so fast. I tried to run, but I only made it a few blocks before everything went dark. Kelvin remembered finding her. How cold she'd been, how close to death. Who did this, Maya? I don't know. It was dark and they wore masks, but before I passed out completely, I saw her. Maya's eyes locked onto his, her gaze intense. A woman, human. She was crying. She knelt beside me and pressed the pendant into my hand. The one around my neck, she said, touching the silver pendant. Maya's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He'll save you, she said. He has to know. Tell him about the archives. The room felt suddenly colder, a sense of dread creeping into Kelvin's bones. Tell who? You, I think, she said, saying him like she knew someone specific. And the pendant led you to me, didn't it? You called the number inside. Kelvin's mind raced. The woman from this morning, the one who'd left the vial. The handwriting that matched his mother's. The pieces weren't fitting together. They were colliding, creating more questions than answers. What archives? Maya slid off the bed and held out her hand. I'll show you, but we have to be quiet. The forbidden archives are, well, forbidden. If Papa finds out, he'll get really angry. He might exile us both. Kelvin took her hand. Then let's not get caught. The secret passage opened behind a tapestry of a blood-red moon, revealing stairs that spiraled down into darkness. Maya produced a small crystal from her robe that glowed with soft crimson light. Vampire magic, Kelvin realized, still trying to wrap his head around the fact that magic was real. They descended for what felt like hours, passing through walls Kelvin would have sworn were solid, navigating turns that seemed designed to confuse intruders. Finally, they emerged into a vast chamber lined floor to ceiling with books, scrolls, and artifacts that hummed with ancient power. The forbidden archives, Maya whispered, her voice filled with awe. Everything the council wants to forget is kept here. She led him past shelves of crumbling texts to a section marked with a symbol, a black rose surrounded by silver thorns. House Blackwood, she read aloud. Papa said they were traitors, that they were destroyed 200 years ago for conspiring with hunters. But there, on a shelf at Kelvin's eye level, was a journal. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed, but the name embossed on the front made his breath catch. Isabella Blackwood. He pulled it down with shaking hands and opened to the first page. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, but as he read the first line, his blood turned to ice. My name is Isabella Blackwood, and I have committed the unforgivable sin. I have fallen in love with a human hunter. Maya leaned in, reading over his shoulder, her crimson eyes wide with dawning realization. Kelvin, I think we just found out why you're special. He turned the page, and his mother's face stared back at him from a pressed photograph, young and smiling, standing next to a man with kind eyes and a hunter's marks tattooed on his wrists. Beneath it, in that same elegant handwriting, our daughter Sarah will be the bridge between our worlds. Sarah, his mother's name. Kelvin's hands shook so badly the journal nearly fell. Maya caught it, her small fingers steadying his trembling hands. Your grandmother, she breathed. Your grandmother was a vampire. Kelvin couldn't breathe. The photograph swam in his vision as Maya held the journal steady, her crimson eyes wide with a shock that mirrored his own. His mother, young, maybe 19, smiled up at the camera with a happiness he'd never seen on her face in his memories. And beside her, his arm around her waist, looking at her like she was his entire world, was King Alaric Valori, younger, less haunted, but unmistakably the same man. Keep reading, Maya whispered, her voice urging him forward. His hands shook as he turned the pages. Isabella's handwriting filled them, hopeful at first, growing more frantic as the entries progressed. March 15th. Alaric doesn't know I'm a hunter. I should tell him. I will tell him. But every time I try, I see how he looks at me, and I'm terrified it will change. The house would kill me for this betrayal. His court would kill me for the deception. But when he touches me, none of it matters. June 3rd. I'm pregnant. Alaric is overjoyed. He wants to announce it to the entire court, declare our child the heir of House Valori. I made him wait. I need to tell him the truth first. I need to make him understand. July 20th. I told him everything. He was angry, so angry the windows shattered with his power. But then he held me and said he didn't care. That love was stronger than blood feuds and ancient grudges. That we would find a way. August 8th. We were fools. The house discovered my betrayal. Master Victor himself came to the castle, demanded I return to face judgment. Alaric refused. The court divided. Some supported their king. Others saw me as a contamination. Councilwoman Seraphine called our unborn child an abomination. Kelvin's stomach twisted. He'd heard that word today, felt the weight of it in the council chamber. September 1st. They're coming. Not just the house, the Vampire Council has declared our union illegal, our child a threat to the natural order. They'll kill us both to prevent a hybrid heir from existing. Alaric wants to fight, but I can't let him destroy his kingdom for me. September 3rd. I'm leaving tonight. Alaric doesn't know. I've packed what I can carry and forged documents for a new identity. Sarah Chin, simple, forgettable, human. I'm taking our son far away, where neither hunters nor vampires will find us. I've left Alaric a letter, though I doubt it will ease his pain. I love him. God help me. I love him more than my own life, but I love our child more. If you're reading this, my darling Kelvin, it means I failed to keep you safe. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But you need to know you are loved. You are not an abomination. You are a miracle, the son of a hunter and a vampire king. The bridge between two worlds. The lullaby I sing you every night. It's more than a song. It's the crimson serum formula encoded in melody. Your father's alchemists created it centuries ago to heal hybrid children. I stole the only sample and destroyed their notes. If they ever find you, if you ever need proof of what you are, sing the song. Your blood will recognize it. Kelvin's throat closed. He could hear it now. His mother's voice in their tiny apartment, rocking him to sleep even when he was too old for lullabies. Roses red and thorns of black, silver moon and crimson track. He'd thought it was just nonsense. A pretty song she'd made up. Kelvin? Maya breathed, her voice trembling. That song. I've heard you humming it when you were nervous in the council chamber. The final entry was dated just 3 days before his mother died. They found us. I don't know how. I've hidden the serum and the journals where only Kelvin can find them. If I don't survive, someone must tell Alaric the truth. Our son lives. Our son is extraordinary, and he needs his father. No. The voice came from the doorway, raw with devastation. No, this can't be. Alaric stood in the archive entrance, his perfect composure shattered. His crimson eyes were wide with shock, his pale face somehow even paler. In his hand he held an identical journal, its pages yellowed with age. I searched for years, he said, his voice breaking on the words. I tore the world apart, looking for you both. They told me there was a fire, that you were trapped inside, that they'd found. He stopped, his throat working, unable to force the words out. They found remains, a woman and child. I buried them. I mourned you. He moved forward like a man in a dream, crossing the archives until he stood before Kelvin. Up close, the resemblance was obvious. The same sharp cheekbones, the same stubborn set to the jaw. How had Kelvin not seen it before? Isabella told me our son would have her eyes, Alaric whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of grief and wonder. Green as spring leaves, eyes that could see good in everyone. Kelvin's eyes were green, the only feature he'd inherited from his mother that wasn't common. You're my father, he managed to croak out, the words feeling surreal, impossible. You're and I'm your sister. Maya launched herself at Kelvin, wrapping her arms around his waist. Really your sister? That's why I could feel you. That's why you felt safe. Alaric knelt, bringing himself to Kelvin's level. His hand reached out, hesitant, and touched Kelvin's cheek with infinite gentleness. You survived, he breathed. You survived, and you're extraordinary. A damper, half vampire, half human. That's why the pendant didn't harm you. It recognized royal blood, but your humanity protected you from the vampire wards. That's why Maya bonded with you instantly. She sensed family. Tears tracked down Alaric's face, and Kelvin realized he was crying too, the dam finally breaking. I thought I'd lost everything, Alaric said, his voice choked with emotion. But Isabella saved you. She kept you safe all these years. And now you're home. I don't understand, Kelvin said, his voice cracking with confusion. Why would they fake our deaths? Who would? The same people who attacked Maya, Alaric said, his grief hardening into fury. The same people who left you that serum. Someone wants the hybrid heir found, but not by me. He stood, pulling both children into his arms, his embrace tight and protective. But they made one critical mistake, he said softly, his voice filled with a chilling promise. They led my son back to me. And now that I have you both, I will burn down anyone who tries to take you away. Kelvin woke to silk sheets and morning light filtering through stained glass. And for 3 blissful seconds he forgot everything. Then it crashed back. The journals, the photographs, the impossible truth. And he had to press his face into the pillow to muffle the sound that tore from his throat. His mother had lied to him about everything. About who she was, who his father was, what Kelvin was. Every bedtime story, every warning to stay hidden. Every time she looked at him with sadness in her eyes. It had all been built on secrets. And now she was gone, and he couldn't even ask her why. A knock at the door. Kelvin didn't answer, but it opened anyway. Alaric entered, carrying a tray with food that smelled better than anything Kelvin had eaten in years. He set it on the bedside table and sat on the edge of the mattress, careful to keep a respectful distance between them. You didn't sleep? Alaric observed, his eyes filled with concern. Can't imagine why. Kelvin's voice came out harsher than intended. Alaric flinched but didn't retreat. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me, but Kelvin, I want to protect you. Please let me protect you. Kelvin sat up, anger flaring hot in his chest. You didn't even know I existed until yesterday. You let Mom hide for 11 years. You let her die thinking she had to keep me away from you. Because I thought you were both dead. Alaric's composure cracked, pain bleeding through. Do you think I wouldn't have torn the world apart to find you if I'd known? Isabella left to protect you from my enemies, and she was right to do it. The moment the court learns what you are. What am I? Kelvin demanded, cutting him off. Everyone keeps calling me hybrid, damper. Like I'm supposed to know what that means. I'm just a kid who lived on the streets and ate garbage, and now apparently I'm part vampire. How is that even possible? Alaric's expression softened. Come with me. Let me show you. They went to the training hall, a vast chamber deep in the castle with padded floors and walls reinforced with steel. Maya was already there with a vampire instructor, practicing forms that looked like deadly ballet. She waved enthusiastically when she saw them. Watch, Alaric said. He moved, and Kelvin's eyes couldn't track it. One moment Alaric stood beside him, the next he was across the room, then back again, the displacement of air the only evidence he'd moved at all. Vampire speed, Alaric explained. We're stronger, faster, more durable than humans. We heal from most injuries in minutes, and you have this in your blood too. I can't do that, Kelvin said, frustration evident in his voice. Because it's dormant. Your human side suppresses it, keeps it buried. But it's there. Alaric gestured to a training dummy. Hit it as hard as you can. Kelvin felt ridiculous, but he approached the dummy and threw a punch. His fist connected with a solid thud, and pain exploded up his arm. Oh, that's just... The dummy's head tore clean off its post and flew across the room, slamming into the far wall with enough force to crack the stone. Kelvin stared at his fist, then at the dummy, back at his fist. What they? Your anger triggered it, Alaric said quietly. Strong emotions unlock your abilities, but without training, without control, you're dangerous to yourself and others. For the next 6 hours, Kelvin learned what he was capable of. Speed that made the world blur, strength that could bend steel, healing that closed cuts in minutes instead of days. But Alaric was right. It was unstable. One moment Kelvin would be moving at human speed, the next he'd crash into a wall because his body had accelerated without warning. His enhanced strength would flare unpredictably, shattering training equipment he'd meant to simply grip. By midday, he was exhausted and frustrated and more confused than ever. This is impossible, he said, slumped against the wall, his body aching. How am I supposed to control something I can't even feel until it happens? Time and practice, Alaric said, sitting beside him, close but not touching. But we may not have that luxury. He pulled out a folder, filled with old photographs, documents, and maps. Your mother kept records. Contacts within the Hunters Guild, people she trusted. Most are dead or disappeared, but a few remain. If we can reach them, they might know who ordered the attack on Isabella, who wants you found. Kelvin studied the papers. One name had been circled multiple times. Marcus Webb. A note in his mother's handwriting read, if something happens to me, Marcus will help. He owes me everything. You want to use me as bait? Kelvin said flatly, his eyes narrowed. I want to find who killed your mother. Alaric's voice was still wrapped in ice. And I want to know why Councilwoman Seraphine has been meeting with known Hunter operatives in secret. He met Kelvin's gaze. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, you would be exposed. But you would be protected every moment. My best guards, surveillance, magical tracking. I'll do it, Kelvin said, his voice resolute. Alaric blinked, surprised by his quick acceptance. Kelvin, you should consider. I've been considering all day. Kelvin stood, his green eyes hard. Someone killed my mom. Someone's trying to use me for something. And apparently someone on your own council is working with Hunters. I want the truth. I want them to pay. So yeah, I'll be your bait. Maya appeared in the doorway, having finished her training. I'm coming too. Absolutely not, Alaric said immediately, his voice brooking no argument. She's my sister. Kelvin surprised himself by saying it, the words feeling strange and unfamiliar on his tongue. If I'm walking into danger, she should know where I am. Through the bond. Maya said, nodding, her crimson eyes determined. I'll feel if something's wrong. I can lead you to him faster than any tracker. Alaric looked between his children. One he'd just found, one he'd raised, and something in his expression crumbled. You're both so much braver than I deserve. 2 days later, Kelvin walked into a coffee shop in the heart of the city, wearing clothes that fit for the first time in years and carrying a phone with a tracking chip embedded in its case. He ordered something called a mocha, his first taste of chocolate in forever, and sat by the window, his senses on high alert. The man who approached looked ordinary. Mid-40s, graying hair, tired eyes. He sat across from Kelvin without asking permission. You look just like her, Marcus Webb said softly, his voice filled with a wistful sadness. Sarah, your mother. She was my partner before she disappeared. She didn't disappear. She was hiding. Kelvin corrected him, his voice firm. I know, Marcus said, leaning forward, his gaze intense. And I know what you are. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around the coffee shop, before continuing in a hushed tone. The guild wants the serum formula, the one Isabella encoded. They're willing to pay anything, offer protection, guarantee your safety. In exchange for what? Kelvin asked, his voice deceptively calm. The lullaby, that's all. Just sing it once. Let us record it, then you can disappear again, live whatever life you want. Kelvin studied him, his expression unreadable. Who hired you, Marcus? Who are you working for? Marcus hesitated again, his eyes filled with fear. I can't. Kelvin leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. Who hired you? Something in Kelvin's voice must have triggered his dormant abilities because Marcus flinched back, his eyes widening in alarm. Councilwoman Seraphine, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She approached us 6 months ago, said there was a hybrid heir, said we needed to find him before the king did. She's paying a fortune, He stopped abruptly, his face paling. You're already with him, you're the bait. Kelvin smiled. Yeah, he said, and it wasn't friendly. And you just confirmed everything we needed to know. The coffee shop doors burst open. Vampire guards poured in, moving too fast for human eyes to track. Marcus ran, desperation etched on his face, but he didn't make it 3 steps before he was tackled to the ground. His struggles futile against the supernatural strength of his captors. The warehouse district reeked of rust and stagnant water. A perfect maze of abandoned buildings and broken dreams. Marcus had given up the meeting location within minutes of capture. The promise of mercy loosening his tongue faster than threats ever could. Now Kelvin crouched on a rooftop 3 blocks away, his senses on high alert. Vampire guards were positioned in the shadows around him, waiting for the signal. This feels wrong, he whispered to the guard beside him, his voice tight with anxiety. A woman named Lyra with silver hair and sharp eyes. Traps usually do, she replied, her voice calm and reassuring. Stay behind us when it starts. Your father would have my head if anything happened to you. The guard met his gaze. We have you, kid, no matter what. Fire erupted from the target warehouse. A ball of orange and black that lit up the night sky. But it wasn't just fire that assaulted Kelvin's senses. Something else mingled with the acrid smoke. A shimmer he couldn't quite place at first. Then it hit him, silver particles, suspended in a vapor. Holy water atomized and weaponized. Magic specifically designed to sear vampire flesh. It's a counter-trap, Lyra screamed, her voice barely cutting through the rising din. Fall back, but her warning came too late. As if on cue, the city around them erupted. Hunters materialized from every conceivable hiding place. Pouring from doorways, spilling out of alleys, stepping from the deepest shadows. Dozens of them, clad in black tactical gear, their faces grim and determined. Crossbows were raised, and blades, gleaming with arcane symbols that Kelvin couldn't decipher, were drawn. They moved with an unnerving precision, like predators who had been stalking their prey for weeks, planning every angle of the ambush. The vampire guards, caught off guard but far from helpless, engaged immediately. The night exploded into a symphony of violence, a cacophony of screams, gunfire, and the sickening thud of bodies hitting the pavement. Kelvin had never witnessed real combat before. He'd seen street brawls, of course, quick, brutal affairs that were usually over in seconds. But this was different. This was war, compressed into the space of a single city block. A brutal ballet of death and desperation. The vampires moved with an almost supernatural grace, becoming blurs of motion as they tore through the initial human defenses. But the hunters were prepared. They knew exactly what they were fighting and had clearly trained for it. Silver nets dropped from rooftops, ensnaring unsuspecting vampires. Explosive bolts filled the air, detonating with blinding flashes and concussive force. One guard went down screaming as holy water ate through his reinforced armor, his inhuman flesh sizzling and smoking. Stay down, Lyra yelled, grabbing Kelvin and yanking him behind a massive air conditioning unit. Don't! He started to protest, but it was too late. A hunter appeared behind Lyra, his face a mask of grim determination, his silver blade raised high, ready to strike. Kelvin didn't think, he reacted. His body moved on instinct, driven by that unstable power that had been flickering within him all week, threatening to overwhelm him. He was suddenly between them, his hand intercepting the descending blade barehanded. It should have cleaved through his flesh, cutting him to the bone. Instead, the blade shattered on impact, the silver fragments scattering across the alley. The hunter's eyes widened in disbelief and terror. Kelvin's grip tightened on the man's wrist, and he heard bones crack like dry twigs snapping in a winter storm. The man screamed, a high-pitched, animalistic sound that grated on Kelvin's ears, and something inside Kelvin snapped. Power flooded through him, raw, uncontrolled, terrifying. The world sharpened into painful clarity. Every heartbeat, every breath, every drop of blood became a symphony of violence. His vampire side surged forward, eclipsing what little humanity he had left, leaving nothing but instinct and predatory hunger. And suddenly, everyone around him looked like prey. He moved with terrifying speed and efficiency. The first hunter went down with a crushed windpipe, his eyes bulging in their sockets as he clawed at his throat. The second flew 20 feet into a brick wall, the impact leaving a bloody smear and a sickening crunch. The third. Kelvin, stop. Lyra's voice cut through the haze, a distant plea in the roaring storm within his mind. But his body had already committed. His hand was around her throat, lifting her off the ground, her face turning an alarming shade of blue as she clawed frantically at his grip. She wasn't a hunter. She was one of his father's guards, sworn to protect him. She was supposed to be an ally, but in that moment, she was just another threat, an obstacle to be eliminated. Stop. Alaric's power crashed over him like a tidal wave, a force so immense that it physically forced Kelvin to his knees. His hand released Lyra, and she collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, her hands clutching at her bruised throat. The red haze lifted, just enough for Kelvin to see what he'd done. The bodies scattered around him, the blood pooling on the pavement, the terror etched on the faces of vampires who were supposed to be on his side. I couldn't, he stammered, horrified by his actions. Secure him, Alaric commanded, his voice cold with fury and fear, and find out what they wanted. Now, vampire guards swarmed him, binding his hands with zip ties, plastic restraints that his newfound strength could have snapped easily if he tried. But he didn't try. He sat slumped against the warehouse wall, his head in his hands, while the vampire guards rounded up the surviving hunters. Medics rushed to Lyra's side, tending to her crushed throat. Alaric, his face a mask of controlled rage, began to interrogate the prisoners with a cold, calculating precision that made Kelvin's stomach churn. One hunter, young, maybe in his early 20s, bleeding from a dozen wounds, started laughing when Alaric demanded answers. A wet, gurgling laugh that sent shivers down Kelvin's spine. You're already too late, he wheezed, blood bubbling from his lips. Seraphine has the princess, has her right now at the old cathedral. While you were chasing ghosts here, she was taking everything you love. The world seemed to stop. Alaric's phone rang. He answered, listened for 3 agonizing seconds, and his face went absolutely white, all color draining from his features. Maya's gone from the castle, he said, his voice barely a whisper, choked with disbelief. Her guards were found unconscious. Seraphine and 6 council members have disappeared. Kelvin felt the bond before anyone said anything else. A psychic link that had been forged the moment he found Maya in the alley. It was still there, a golden thread in his mind, but it was screaming now. Terror, confusion, and a desperate, silent cry for help. The cathedral, Kelvin gasped, his voice hoarse with fear. She's scared. She's so scared. They moved as one, every vampire, every guard racing back toward the castle to mobilize forces. But when they arrived, chaos had already taken root. Council members were split into factions, shouting at each other in the throne room, their voices rising in a cacophony of accusation and recrimination. Half wanted to storm the cathedral immediately. Half insisted it was a trap, a carefully laid snare designed to lure them into a fatal ambush. All of them seemed to have forgotten that a little girl was in mortal danger. Enough! Alaric's power silenced them instantly, a wave of raw authority that crashed over the room, silencing even the most vocal dissenters. I am still your king. We will. You're the king of nothing if Seraphine claims the throne by right of conquest. An older vampire interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. She has 6 council members with her, Alaric. 6 votes. She's challenging your rule. If you leave this castle, if you abandon your seat of power, she can claim you abdicated through cowardice. My daughter is one life weighed against the entire kingdom? Alaric roared. The vampire's voice was cold, devoid of emotion. A king makes hard choices. Alaric looked torn in two, his ancient composure finally shattering completely. Kelvin saw it in his face. The impossible choice between the daughter he'd raised and the kingdom he'd ruled for centuries. Both were his responsibility. Both were his burden. No. Kelvin stood, ripping through the zip ties with a surge of strength he didn't know he possessed. You don't get to choose, Kelvin. I'll get Maya. His voice was surprisingly steady, despite the fear coursing through his veins, threatening to overwhelm him. You stay here, hold the throne, keep Seraphine from winning by default. I'll bring my sister home. You can't go alone. Your powers are unstable. You nearly killed one of my guards. Then I'll take Lyra and whoever else can move fast. Kelvin met his father's eyes, his gaze unwavering. You told me Maya could feel me, that our bond was real. She's calling for me right now, not you, me, because I'm her brother, and I'm the one who found her the first time. Alaric looked like he might argue, might pull rank, might lock Kelvin in the tower rather than let him walk into danger. Instead, he pulled a ring from his finger, a heavy band of silver set with a crimson stone, and pressed it into Kelvin's palm. The royal seal, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Any vampire who sees this must obey your commands as if they came from me. Bring her home, son. Bring my daughter home. Kelvin closed his fist around the ring, the cold metal a reassuring weight in his hand. Count on it. The cathedral loomed against the night sky like a monument to forgotten gods, its spires clawing at the low-hanging clouds that threatened rain. It exuded an aura of decay and abandonment, a place where hope had long since died. Kelvin approached from the east, moving through the shadows with a newfound grace that was becoming more natural with every passing hour. Lyra and 3 other guards followed at a distance, close enough to provide support, far enough to let him work. Because Kelvin had realized something during the frantic planning session. His hybrid nature made him invisible in a way no pure vampire could be. When vampires extended their senses, searching for threats, they felt for human heartbeats and the warmth of human blood. Kelvin registered as vampire cold, still other. When hunters used their detection spells and blessed wards, they sought undead corruption and dark magic. Kelvin's human half deflected those, making him read as mortal. To both sides he was a ghost, a nothing, the perfect infiltrator. He slipped through a broken window on the cathedral's north side, landing silently in what had once been a chapel. Dust and debris covered everything, a testament to years of neglect. Moonlight streamed through shattered stained glass windows, painting the floor in broken colors, a macabre mosaic of light and shadow. He could hear them below, heartbeats, footsteps, the low murmur of voices plotting treason. The air was thick with the stench of mildew and despair. Following the bond was easy. Maya's fear sank through his blood like a distress beacon, pulling him down through the cathedral's guts, past rooms that stank of mold and rot, until he reached a door reinforced with new steel and warded with symbols that made his skin crawl. He tested the handle. Locked, obviously, but the door was old wood beneath the steel plating, and his strength was getting easier to control with every passing hour. One hard yank and the lock tore free with a shriek of metal that echoed through the silent cathedral. Maya sat in the center of the room, silver chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles, their cold metal gleaming in the dim light. Where they touched her skin, angry red burns marked her pale flesh. She looked up as Kelvin entered, and relief flooded her face so completely that he thought she might cry. You came, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I knew you would, but I was scared. Shoo! Kelvin knelt beside her, his heart aching at the sight of her suffering. He examined the chains, the silver burning his skin on contact. Silver burned vampires on contact. His hands were already smoking where he gripped the links, pain shooting up his arms, but his human half let him tolerate it for crucial seconds. He pulled, muscles straining, and the chain snapped with a resounding crack. Maya gasped as the silver fell away, revealing burns that would take days to heal, even with vampire regeneration. Can you walk? Kelvin asked, his voice filled with concern. I think so, she said, wincing as she tried to move. They gave me something, made me weak. I'll carry you. He lifted her easily. She weighed almost nothing. He turned toward the door. Seraphine stood there, blocking the exit, 6 other vampires flanking her. All wore expressions of cold satisfaction. The hybrid arrives, she said, her ice blue eyes glittering with malice. How predictable, how touching, and how perfectly it serves our needs. Get out of my way, Kelvin growled, his voice low and dangerous. Or what? You'll lose control again? Kill more allies? You're a weapon you can't even aim, boy. That's why abominations like you are forbidden. She gestured, and the vampires moved forward, their eyes glowing with predatory hunger. Take them both alive, Seraphine commanded. They'll make excellent bargaining chips. Kelvin ran, not toward them, toward the window behind him. His enhanced speed kicked in naturally now, born of desperation and need. He crashed through the old glass and into open air. Maya clutched tight against his chest, her arms wrapped around his neck. For one terrifying moment, they fell 3 stories of empty space rushing past. Then Lyra was there, catching them midair with vampire speed, redirecting their momentum into a controlled landing in the courtyard below. Kelvin gasped, struggling to catch his breath. They're moving on the castle. They ran through streets that blurred into streaks of light and shadow, the wind whipping through their hair. Behind them, Kelvin heard the sounds of pursuit, Seraphine and her traitorous allies giving chase. But ahead, the castle grew closer, its towers burning with emergency beacons. That meant the attack had already begun. They burst through the gates into pandemonium. The throne room had become a battlefield. Seraphine's rogue vampires clashed with Alaric's loyal guards in a violent dance that tore tapestries from walls and shattered ancient furniture. Hunters moved between them, those who'd allied with the traitors, using blessed weapons to even the odds. The air was thick with the smell of blood, sweat, and ozone. In the center of it all, Alaric fought with the terrible grace of a king pushed too far, his power making the very air tremble. He moved like a force of nature, a whirlwind of silver and crimson, cutting down his enemies with ruthless efficiency. Enough! Seraphine's voice cut through the chaos, silencing the clash of steel and the screams of the dying. She stood on the dais beside the throne, Maya's stolen crown clutched in her hands. King Alaric, you will abdicate, or I will kill your precious daughter right here. Maya's not. Someone started to say, but the words were cut short. Then Kelvin crashed through the skylight. Glass rained down like diamonds as he landed in the center of the throne room, Maya still safe in his arms. He set her down carefully, putting himself between her and Seraphine, and felt every eye in the room turn toward them. Maya! Alaric's relief was palpable, radiating across the room like a physical force. You're too late, Seraphine snarled, her face contorted with rage. The challenge stands. I have 6 council votes. I have an army, and I have this. She produced a vial from her robes, holding it aloft for all to see. Inside, a crimson liquid seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Pure crimson serum, undiluted, enough to kill any vampire in seconds, even pure-blood royalty. You wouldn't dare, Alaric said, his voice a low growl. Wouldn't I? Her smile was terrible, a glimpse into the darkness that resided within her soul. Your line ends tonight, Alaric, both your children dead. Then the throne passes to the council, and the council belongs to me. She moved with vampire speed, crossing the throne room in a blur, the vial raised high, ready to deliver its deadly payload. Kelvin was faster. He didn't think about what he was doing, didn't consider the consequences. He just moved, putting himself between Seraphine and Maya, and felt the serum splash across his face and neck, burning like acid. The throne room went silent, every breath held, every heartbeat suspended. You fool! Seraphine breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. That dose would kill 10 vampires. For a hybrid it will be agony. Kelvin waited for the pain, for the poison to eat through him, to dissolve his flesh and shatter his bones. It didn't come. Instead, warmth spread from where the serum touched his skin. Not burning, transforming. He felt his blood respond, felt it recognize the formula encoded in his mother's lullaby, felt his hybrid nature do something impossible. His veins began to glow beneath his skin, a crimson light spreading from his heart to his extremities. The serum wasn't killing him, Alaric said, his voice filled with awe and wonder. It was activating him. Impossible, Seraphine whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Kelvin looked at his hands, at the light pulsing beneath his skin, and understood with sudden clarity what his mother had created. Not just a formula to heal hybrids, a formula to make them whole. He turned to Maya, his eyes filled with a newfound hope. Maya, he said calmly, come here. His sister approached, confusion and trepidation etched on her face. Kelvin took her burned wrists in his hands, and where his skin touched hers, the light spread. The silver burns healed in seconds, her strength returning as is transformed. Awakened blood neutralized the poison in her system. He's an antidote, Alaric said with wonder. His blood can cure crimson serum poisoning. Then kill him, Seraphine screamed at her allies. Kill him before. But Alaric was already moving, and the loyal guards with him, and the battle was joined in earnest. Kelvin pulled Maya behind the throne as violence erupted around them, his body still glowing with that strange light, his mind reeling with the implications. His mother hadn't just hidden him. She'd created him to be the cure for the very weapon that had threatened his existence. The tower room had become familiar in ways Kelvin never expected. He knew which floorboards creaked, where the morning light hit first, how the wind sounded different depending on which window was open. A week ago he'd been terrified to touch anything. Now he sat propped against the headboard with books scattered across the blankets, studying vampire history like it was homework he'd actually chosen to do. Maya was curled up at the foot of the bed, her platinum hair still damp from a bath, working on a drawing with intense concentration. She'd barely left his side since the throne room battle. Neither of them talked about it much, the fear, the violence, how close they'd come to losing everything. But sometimes she'd reach out and touch his hand just to make sure he was real. And Kelvin understood completely. He did the same thing. You're drawing the cathedral, he observed, watching her sketch the Gothic spires. I want to remember it different, she said without looking up, her brow furrowed in concentration. Not scary, just a place where my brother saved me. Brother. The word still felt strange and right at the same time. The door opened without knocking. Only one person had that privilege. Alaric entered, carrying a wooden box inlaid with silver, his expression serious in a way that made Kelvin's stomach tighten. We need to talk, Alaric said, settling into the chair beside the bed. About your future. That sounds ominous. It's a choice, Alaric said. One I should have offered you immediately, but He paused, choosing his words carefully. I was selfish. I just found my son. I didn't want to lose you again. Maya's pencil stopped moving. There's a ritual, Alaric continued, his voice low and somber. Old magic, very powerful. It can suppress your vampire nature completely. Lock it away where it can never surface. You'd live as fully human, with no memory of any of this. The castle, the court, Maya, and me. It would all fade like a dream. You could return to the human world, be adopted by a good family, live a normal life. The words hung in the air like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. You're offering to erase me? Kelvin said slowly, his voice filled with disbelief. I'm offering you freedom. Alaric's crimson eyes were shadowed with pain. You didn't choose this life. It was thrust upon you by circumstance and bloodline. You deserve the chance to be just, Kelvin, a boy who gets to be normal. I was normal, Kelvin said, his voice hardening. For 2 years I was so normal. I slept in alleys and ate from dumpsters and watched people walk past me like I was invisible. That's what normal got me. He swung his legs off the bed, standing to face his father properly. I spent 2 years surviving, he said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. Just making it to the next day, the next meal, the next safe place to sleep. I don't want to survive anymore. I want to live. And I can't do that by pretending half of what I am doesn't exist. The court will never fully accept you, Alaric warned, his voice filled with concern. Seraphine's faction is defeated, but prejudice runs deep. You'll face suspicion, hostility, danger. Kelvin smiled slightly, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. Dad, I've been in danger since Mom died. At least here I'm in danger with family. Alaric's composure cracked. He stood and pulled Kelvin into an embrace that smelled like old books and rain. A gesture of love and acceptance that transcended words. And Kelvin felt something in his chest unlock. A knot of fear and loneliness that had been tied there since he was 8 years old. Then we do this properly, Alaric said when they separated, his voice thick with emotion. The day of the ceremony arrived, held at sunset when both vampires and humans could comfortably attend. The throne room had been meticulously restored, the battle damage erased by teams of servants who worked with supernatural efficiency. Council members lined the walls, some looking pleased, others barely concealing their disgust. The air was thick with anticipation and unspoken tension. Kelvin wore formal clothes that actually fit, tailored to his frame with a skill that spoke of centuries of royal tradition. His hair was trimmed and styled, and he looked like someone who belonged in a castle instead of an alley. Maya stood beside him in a gown of deep crimson, holding his hand tight enough to hurt, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and protectiveness. Alaric rose from his throne, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room, silencing the murmurs and whispers. I call this court to witness, he declared, his voice resonating with power and authority. For 11 years, I mourned a son I believed lost. I raised one daughter and thought my line would end with her. But the past has returned to us, brought by fate and a mother's sacrifice. He descended from the dais, stopping before Kelvin. Kelvin Valori, born of Isabella Blackwood and Alaric Valori. I acknowledge you before this court as my son and heir. Blood of my blood, bone of my bone, and no prejudice or ancient law will deny you your birthright. Murmurs rippled through the assembly, a wave of shock and disbelief washing over the room. One council member, an ancient vampire with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. The boy is a damper, he said, his voice not unkindly but firm. A hybrid, unprecedented as an heir. The court must understand what this means. It means, Alaric said, his power making the chandeliers tremble, that my son carries within him the cure to the greatest weapon ever forged against our kind. He gestured, and scholars brought forward Isabella's journals, the formula decoded, chemical analyses that made Kelvin's head hurt. But the conclusion was clear, undeniable. The lullaby wasn't instructions for making crimson serum. It was the antidote. Isabella Blackwood discovered the serum's fatal flaw. One scholar explained, his voice filled with awe. She created a counteragent and encoded it so deeply that only someone with both vampire and human blood could activate it. She made herself a target, died protecting the secret, knowing one day her son would be the bridge between two worlds. Kelvin felt tears sting his eyes, the weight of his mother's sacrifice pressing down on him. All those nights she'd sung to him, rocking him to sleep, even when they had nothing else, she'd been programming his very blood to be salvation. Every note, every repetition, every gentle word had been building toward this moment. Your mother saved us all, Alaric said softly, his voice meant for Kelvin's ears alone. She saw what I was too blind to see, that the war between our kinds would destroy both. She created you to be the peace we couldn't make ourselves. He placed a circlet on Kelvin's head, a simple band of silver worked with crimson stones, not as elaborate as Maya's crown, but unmistakably royal. Welcome home, my son. The court erupted, some in applause, others in outrage, all in shock. But Kelvin barely heard them. He was looking at Maya, who was crying and smiling at the same time, and at Alaric, who looked at him like he was something precious instead of something disposable. Later, after the ceremony dissolved into complicated political discussions Kelvin didn't understand yet, the three of them stood on the balcony overlooking the mountains. Dawn was coming. Alaric would need to retreat inside soon. But for now, they watched the sky lighten from black to deep blue to the first hints of gold. Does it hurt? Kelvin asked, gesturing towards the horizon. The sunlight? Like fire? Alaric admitted, his face etched with pain. But I wanted to see this. Your first sunrise as my acknowledged son. Maya yawned, leaning against Kelvin's side. Are you scared? She asked about being a prince. Terrified, Kelvin said honestly. But I've been scared before. This time I'm not alone. The sun broke over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. Alaric squeezed Kelvin's shoulder once, then retreated into the shadows, leaving the siblings to watch the day arrive. For the first time since he was 8 years old, Kelvin wasn't alone. He had a father who'd torn the world apart looking for him, a sister who could feel his heart across miles, a purpose beyond simple survival. He was a hybrid prince who shouldn't exist, the bridge between two worlds that had been at war for centuries, the living cure to a poison that had claimed countless lives. His story was just beginning, but for now, in this moment, standing in the sunrise with his sister's hand in his, Kelvin let himself simply be a boy who'd finally found his way home.